Hi everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wondered about music. So, whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. And I'm back. I know it's been a while since the last episode, and I'm so sorry for that. I've been traveling a lot for work. I got sick. Life has been chaotic lately, honestly, and I think I just put a lot of pressure on myself. I never miss an episode, so it really did feel like the end of the world, but trying to cut myself some slack. Thanks for hanging in there, and we are now back in the game. So it was National Album Day on the 18th of October, and it just had me thinking. It's a day that's meant to celebrate more than just music, but the art of the album itself. Because albums aren't simply just collections of songs, they're literally stories, carefully crafted journeys through emotion, narrative, and sound. Each track is almost like a chapter and kind of made to have as a moment of reflection. And that really got me just reflecting. When was the last time that you really listened to an album? I mean, like start to finish, and not while scrolling on your phone, not as background noise while commuting or cleaning, but truly listen to it. When did you give yourself the time and attention to immerse yourself fully in the music, to follow its arc and feel every kind of nuance that it offers you? I think in our fast-paced, multitasking world that we live in, that kind of listening has become quite rare. And yet it's precisely this intentional, focused listening that really transforms music from something that we consume into something that we experience. So that was the inspo for today's episode. I want to explore why albums matter, how deep listening shapes our minds and emotions, and how you can reclaim that kind of attentive, immersive listening into your own life. Now, we're living in what psychologists call the attention economy, which is a world where our focus has literally become currency. Every app, every notification, every vibration in our pocket is competing for it. And in this environment, music, which used to be kind of the centerpiece of our attention, has quietly kind of adapted to survive. It's obviously still there, but now I think it plays a very different role. So once upon a time, listening to an album was an event. You'd sit down, place the record, and listen from start to finish. Maybe reading the liner notes, absorbing every lyric, and just waiting for that next song to begin. It was very ritualistic and emotional. But now we stream songs while scrolling through feeds, replying to emails, or just kind of half listening on the train. Now, I saw this quote where it said that music has become the soundtrack of our lives, but also the wallpaper of our minds. And I think that's so powerful in explaining just the way that the role of music has shifted in our day-to-day, and something that I find that we need to put the spotlight on, because for those of us who really love music and hold it so dear to our hearts, I think it's important that we kind of reclaim that really deep and emotional connection that we have with it and don't slip into these patterns of it just becoming kind of background noise. Streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and even YouTube have made music more accessible than ever. But accessibility also has a kind of darker side to it. We've got these autoplay queues now, endless recommendations, and made-for-you playlists that actually mean that we rarely, one, sit in silence, or two, actually consciously decide what we want to hear next. The music never stops, but our attention does. So one study conducted in 2022 actually found that when people listen passively, so for example, while multitasking or scrolling, they process fewer emotional nuances and also recall fewer lyrics and show weaker physiological responses as well, such as heart rate changes or skin conductance, which is actually one of the most magical things about music, I would say, is that physical effect that it can have on our body. So, in other words, when we divide our attention, we literally feel less. The songs are still playing, but it's kind of like just in grayscale. And this problem actually extends beyond streaming. We're kind of part of this culture built on multitasking. We listen while we're working, cleaning, exercising, cooking, and commuting. And often all of those things occur in the same day. Yet neuroscience actually tells us that the human brain doesn't actually multitask. It switches between tasks rapidly and actually inefficiently, burning through mental energy with each task. So one study on multitasking actually showed that frequent multitaskers actually struggle to filter irrelevant information and sustain focus, meaning that when we listen to music while doing other things, our brains can't fully register its details. They all just kind of blur together. I'd say it's like trying to read poetry in a crowded room. And then there's the rise of short form content as well, like TikTok, Reels, and Shorts, where songs are cut down to 10 or 15-second clips. The hook literally becomes the product, kind of separated from the story that it once belonged to. And this has reshaped not only how we listen, but how artists create as well. Now, I touched on this in a separate episode on TikTok and the rise of that kind of culture in general. But many producers now build tracks with those first few seconds in mind. It's like the instant dopamine hit that keeps us from swiping away. But dopamine in its natural form actually thrives on anticipation. So neuroscientists have shown that the deepest musical pleasure comes from actually not instant reward, but actually from something called delayed gratification. And this is when tension builds across time, when your brain kind of predicts what's coming and then either gets it right or beautifully wrong. And that's actually what gives you chills, tears, or just that full body rush that we experience. And when we skip ahead or consume music in these fragments, we actually break this emotional arc. It's kind of like cutting a movie before the final act. The catharsis never really arrives. And so emotionally, something subtle but profound happens. Music begins to flatten. We actually stop noticing the micro details, the melancholy in a chord progression, the way a vocal trembles, the breath before a key change, and the silence between the notes. Those moments that honestly feel the most human, they kind of slip past us, kind of unnoticed. And coming back to those bodily reactions, so psychologists call the physiological response to emotionally powerful music frisson. And this is the goosebumps, chills, or tears that we sometimes feel when a piece of music just hits us right. But frisson relies on attention. It's the body's reaction to emotional depth, to surprise, to meaning. But when music becomes background noise, the emotional triggers that cause frisson don't reach us in the same way. We're basically too busy, too divided and distracted. So, in a strange way, our relationship with music has become more constant, but less conscious. We listen to more songs than any generation before us, I would say, yet we rarely listen deeply. The playlist is always on, but the presence, so the act of actually really being there with the sound, is missing. So what was once an intimate ritual has become just another kind of form of digital multitasking. And maybe that's kind of the paradox of our era, that music has never been more available, yet our capacity to truly hear it, to feel it in full, is quietly slipping away. Now, I've spoken about this previously, but in a world where streaming gives us access to 100 million songs with a single tap, It's remarkable, actually, that one of the oldest formats, vinyl, is not only surviving, but actually thriving. Vinyl sales have been climbing for over a decade, and actually in recent years, more than ever. And I love it. I love my vinyl collection. I actually make a habit to just collect records that mean something to me. So all the records that I have are just my favorite albums of all time. And I absolutely love that ritual. I love it because what was once considered obsolete is now a cultural statement. But this revival, I don't think it's just about retro aesthetics. It's psychological because in this age of frictionless consumption, vinyl reintroduces friction. It intentionally slows us down. So think about it. To play a record, you have to choose one album. You have to sit down, take it out of its sleeve, place the needle carefully, and listen to one side before potentially flipping it. And each of those gestures carries such intention. You've got the physical, the temporal, and the emotional. And psychologists actually call this embodied listening. It's the idea that when our body participates in the act of listening, our mind becomes more present in the experience. So the ritual itself, flipping the record, studying the artwork, reading the notes, it turns music back into an activity rather than just background noise. And I absolutely love it. Researchers in cultural psychology have found that nostalgia-driven behaviors often actually serve a regulatory function, so helping people reconnect with meaning and continuity during times of rapid change, for example. So in this fast digital world that we're living in, analog formats offer this kind of counterbalance. It's a way to regain a sense of control, routine, and mindfulness. And similarly, media theorists studying slow media actually argued that formats requiring patience and effort create deeper satisfaction because they actually restore the value of time. When something takes effort, we pay attention, and that attention transforms the experience. And vinyl also invites us into this kind of temporal commitment as well, something that streaming largely got rid of, I would say. There's no skip button. You sit with side A of the vinyl until it's over. And that constraint really just fosters what psychologists call attentional anchoring. And this is when the mind stays tethered to one experience instead of drifting between tasks or tabs, which is something that I can officially say that I don't do on a daily basis. I think, like I said, we've all really slipped into this multitasking culture, and I work remotely and everything I do is on my laptop. And I always say, in meetings, when those things kind of all take place on the same screen, it's really easy to just kind of context switch and start to do other things. And you really start to realize that you're not really present at any given moment. And I think this really shows that the limitations of vinyl that were initially there have actually become its power today, which I find fascinating. And I think that really just shows the broader cultural shift that we're going through as a society. And speaking of nostalgia, there's also this kind of tactile nostalgia factor as well. You've got this warmth of analog sound, the weight of the vinyl sleeve, and those imperfections in the playback. And actually, studies have shown that physical media activates a stronger emotional memory than digital formats, for example, because touch actually enhances encoding. So, in other words, actually holding a record physically helps us remember not just the music, but where we were, how we felt, and who we were with when we listened to it. And honestly, that's exactly why I love to collect just the albums that mean the most to me, because for me, it's almost like rewriting the memories and making sure that those stick with me. And I think it's such a precious ritual to have. And an expensive one, not gonna lie. So I think that the vinyl resurgence, it isn't just about sound. Overall, it's about presence. I think people really miss the feeling of choosing, waiting, and listening. In this attention economy that's designed for convenience, vinyl reintroduces care. It really just demands our time and, in return, rewards us with meaning. So I think that's the real question behind the vinyl comeback. Are we returning to vinyl because we miss listening with intention, or because deep down we miss being fully present with the music? But okay, so before playlists and shuffle buttons, albums were experiences. They were crafted journeys, and they still are a lot of the time, with beginnings, middles, and ends. The order of the songs wasn't arbitrary, it was literally storytelling. Artists once obsessed over track sequencing, the way that filmmakers obsess over editing. Each transition carried emotional intent. And listening to an album front to back wasn't just entertainment, it was actually a form of psychological immersion. And there are a lot of modern albums and artists that do take this principle still into practice. So, for example, take Adele's 21 album. So it follows this emotional rhythm of loss, heartbreak, longing, reflection, and resolution. So it starts off with Rolling in the Deep. We enter defiance and disbelief. Midway through, we've got Someone Like You, which offers this kind of acceptance stage. And psychologists actually describe this as emotional regulation through narrative continuity. And this means that music allows us to experience emotions safely, with resolution actually built into the structure. And it's been found that listeners who engage with albums featuring clear emotional sequencing actually report higher feelings of closure and emotional satisfaction compared to those listening to playlists with similar songs in a random order. Now, there's also a neurological basis as well for why sequencing matters. So, research in music cognition actually shows that our brains respond strongly to expectation and resolution. Now, this is something that I talk about all the time on the Soundmind, but when an album creates a consistent emotional or tonal narrative, the brain's reward system responds with increased activation during those moments of resolution. So, in other words, the satisfaction that you feel when a closing track just ties an album together, it isn't just emotional. It's actually neurochemical. It's your brain's way of rewarding the narrative coherence, which is pretty amazing, I would say. And this also connects to how we form memory. So, studies have shown that people remember the beginnings and endings of sequences better than the middle, and this is known as the primacy and recency effects. And albums actually use this principle instinctively. So, the first track of the album really sets the emotional tone and primes the listener's expectations, and the final track provides closure. And when sequencing is intentional, it really transforms an album from a collection of songs into an emotional landscape. Each track just feels like a necessary part of the story and the journey. An artist design transitions to manipulate mood. So, for example, a bright major key followed by a minor ballad resets the emotional contrast. And a sudden tempo drop really invites reflection in the middle of an album. It's a constant dialogue between tension and release, familiarity and surprise. And these are the very principles that govern how our brains process stories, films, and even dreams, actually. So when we abandon sequencing for shuffle, we lose that carefully constructed emotional logic. It's like watching a film out of order or skipping chapters in a novel. The meaning kind of changes, or sometimes it disappears altogether. And I think the art of sequencing really reminds us that music, at its best, isn't meant to be fragmented. It's really meant to take us somewhere. And when we surrender to that journey, track by track, without actually skipping, we rediscover something rare in our distracted listening age: emotional coherence, presence, and this sense of being carried by sound. But at its core, the reason that albums move us isn't just about artistry, it's about psychology. Our brains are literally wired for stories. We crave structure, patterns, and emotional resolution. And that's why, even when music has no words, we instinctively hear it as a kind of narrative, as a story. It rises, it falls, creates tension, and finds its release, mirroring the kind of rhythms of human experience. When we listen to a well-sequenced album, we're essentially participating in a guided emotional experience. Unlike playlists or singles, albums provide a built-in resolution, a sense that the feelings will go somewhere. And our brains love this sense of direction because of something called predictive processing. So, in neuroscience, predictive coding theory suggests that the brain is a prediction machine, constantly trying to anticipate what comes next. And this is a key aspect of how we experience music. When a melody builds or a rhythm repeats, the brain starts forecasting the next sound or emotional cue. And if the next track aligns with that prediction, say a soft ballad follows an intense song, we experience satisfaction and that kind of dopamine reward. And if it defies our expectation, we can feel surprise, curiosity, or even delight. And this constant dance between expectation and outcome is what keeps us emotionally engaged. Albums satisfy this deep psychological need for continuity. In a world of fragments, the album offers something linear, something whole. It gives our brains what they crave most but rarely get: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, there's a subtle, almost magical transformation that occurs when we stop multitasking, put on our headphones, and allow ourselves to truly listen. Not as background noise while scrolling, commuting, or working, but as the sole focus of our attention. In these moments, music shifts from being just sound to becoming a full-bodied experience, a sensation that resonates in our minds, bodies, and also our memory simultaneously. And psychologists describe this state as deep listening, a mode of full sensory immersion where every note, silence, and texture occupies your awareness. It aligns closely with a concept called flow, which is the mental zone where time seems suspended, self-consciousness fades, and complete absorption occurs. Neurologically, the flow state involves a kind of quieting of your prefrontal cortex, which is the brain region responsible for self-monitoring and time perception. And this is actually why, in the midst of an album, you might suddenly look up and realize that an hour has slipped by without even noticing. But deep listening activates a wide network of different brain regions. So the auditory cortex processes the intricate layers of sound. The emotional centers, such as the amygdala and the insula, respond to tension, release, and resonance. And even motor and visual areas are engaged as the brain simulates movement, color, and imagery, which is associated with the music. And one study actually demonstrated that listening to emotionally powerful music triggers dopamine release in two different phases. So first in the anticipation of climactic moments, and then at the emotional peak. And these reward circuits are the same ones that actually respond to food, romantic connection, and visual art, which really just further suggests that music pleasure is just hardwired into our biology. And coming back to those physiological effects, they are so striking. So the shiver down your spine, the lump in your throat, the quickened heartbeat, these are all manifestations of frisson, what I mentioned earlier, the body's response to emotionally charged sound. And fMRI studies have shown that people experiencing frisson exhibit heightened activity in the amygdala, which is the emotional center, also the insula, which is related to bodily awareness, and the nucleus accumbens, which is related to reward. And this just reflects a profound synchronization of mind and body. Heart rate and skin conductance can really mirror the kind of flow of the music, showing us just how intimately our physiology is tied to sound. It's honestly incredible. But deep listening also enhances memory and recall. So the hippocampus, which is central to forming and retrieving memories, encodes musical experiences more vividly when attention is sustained. This is why a song from your past can instantly transport you to a specific moment. One study actually found that the intensity of emotion experienced during listening predicts actually how strongly a piece of music will be remembered weeks later, which actually gives you all the more reason to listen with intentionality, no matter what setting you're in, because that can lead to stronger memories, which is pretty amazing too. But the impact of deep listening isn't just limited to nostalgia or memory. It also has tangible effects on mental health and emotional regulation. Focused listening lowers cortisol, which is the stress hormone, while increasing oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, particularly when the music resonates with you on an emotional level. And by quieting the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response, and in turn activating the parasympathetic system, deep listening really creates a state of calm, grounding, and restoration. Essentially, it's a form of everyday mindfulness where sound becomes an anchor and a guide through that part of your day. Now, I love this. Neuroscientist Anil Seth describes consciousness as a controlled hallucination shaped by prediction and perception. And really, deep listening is rare and almost like a voluntary surrender to this process. Really, just letting music, rather than our devices or distractions, guide perception, emotion, and awareness. It really encourages presence, actually strengthens emotional intelligence, and just reconnects us to our own internal rhythms. Listening this way isn't passive at all, it's participatory. You and the music are in the dialogue with each other, each shaping the other. And from a cognitive perspective, intentional listening has measurable benefits. Studies show that alpha brain waves, which are linked to relaxation, creativity, and calm focus, actually increase during deep listening. And these are the same brain waves elicited by meditation and slow breathing, really highlighting music's capacity to cultivate this balanced mental state. Focused listening also boosts working memory, allowing the brain to hold, manipulate, and integrate information more effectively. Now, one study actually found that participants who engaged in attentive listening exercises were better able to recall details, track sequences, and maintain concentration across different tasks. So, in conclusion, deep listening is really a mental workout that sharpens attention, memory, and clarity. Ultimately, deep listening is more than just pleasure. It's honestly a holistic practice. When we dedicate attention to an album, track by track, we're training our brains, soothing our bodies, and engaging our emotions with intention. In an age of distraction that we're living in, this practice is almost radical. It basically reminds us that music is not just to be heard, but actually to be felt fully in the mind, in the body, in the heart. It's kind of a bridge between art and consciousness, and really just encouraging mindfulness and presence, which is such a rare opportunity to inhabit a world of sound just fully with ourselves and our presence. So I want to leave you with a small experiment, a kind of musical mindfulness exercise. So when you have a quiet evening, maybe one night this week, take one of your favorite albums. something that you've loved for years, or maybe something new that's been sitting in your library untouched. Before you start, put it on shuffle. Yep, I'm telling you to deliberately break the sequence. Listen to 3 or 4 tracks maybe in a random order and notice how it feels. At first, it might seem fine, especially if you already know the album. It's familiar songs, familiar emotions. But I want you to pay attention to the subtle difference. Does the story still make sense? Do the transitions between songs feel jarring or incomplete? Maybe a song that once hit you hard doesn't quite land in the same way when it's stripped out of its context. And that's because, as we've discussed today, albums are designed with that psychological flow in mind. And when we listen on shuffle, we're disrupting that emotional architecture. Without sequence, we lose direction. So we might still feel the pleasure, but the kind of coherence, the sense of being carried through something, disappears. So like I said earlier, it's a bit like taking your favorite film and cutting it into scenes and watching them out of order. You still recognize the characters, but the emotional pacing of the story is gone. And now for the second part of the experiment, the album ritual. So find a time and place where you're not going to be interrupted. Put your phone away, put it in another room, put it on the side, wherever you're not going to touch it. Dim the lights, maybe light a candle, make it cozy, and put on your headphones. And then start the album from the very first track. Let it play all the way through without skipping. Treat it as a kind of listening meditation. If your mind starts to wander, bring it back to the sound. And really notice the details that you might usually miss. The breath between verses, the way that one song dissolves into the next, the quiet moments between the tracks. And when you reach the final track, take a moment to reflect. How does your body feel? Do you feel calmer, more open, maybe even emotionally full? Did you experience any physiological reactions like chills? Did you get emotional? You might find that the experience feels less like listening to songs and more like being taken somewhere, like transported. And that's really the power of undistracted attention that I want you to experience. It deepens emotion, restores focus, and just reconnects you with the original intention behind the music. And there's a reason that this feels grounding. When you slow down and listen intentionally, your brain shifts into the same relaxed attentional state encouraged in mindfulness meditation. The parasympathetic nervous system is activated. Your breathing slows, your stress hormones drop, and you become more present. It's not just good for your mind, it's good for your whole nervous system. So try it out and let me know how you get on. I'm really curious. Did it enhance your love and appreciation for a particular album? Or did you find it quite difficult? You know, these kind of exercises where you really have to tune in and just sit with yourself, they can be really difficult at first. So cut yourself some slack, really try and get through it and reflect on your experience and share it with me. I would love to hear how it went. So maybe that's what albums teach us in the end, that attention is a form of love. Love for the artist, for the craft, and also for yourself. In giving a single album your full focus, you're reclaiming something that we've lost in this age of constant noise. The simple, quiet act of deep listening. So take this episode as a reminder of what it means to listen, to give our attention to something for longer than just a few seconds, even a few minutes. To surrender fully to sound without skipping, multitasking, or checking what's next. And remember that music at its core was never meant to be consumed in fragments, but just experienced in full. I think that albums are something rare of us these days. It's patience. They invite us to sit still, to follow a story from beginning to end and to feel the emotions that come with that journey. The build up, the tension, the release, the quiet after it ends. And in doing so, they remind us of something bigger, that our ability to listen actually deeply reflects how we engage with the world around us. And when you listen to an album with full presence, you're practicing a kind of emotional mindfulness. You're training your brain to slow down, to process emotion in sequence, and to find coherence. You're saying, I'm here, I'm listening, fully. So this week, try to make time for that ritual. Pick an album, press play, and just listen. Let it carry you somewhere. Let it remind you what it feels like to be completely present with the music and also with yourself. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do, or may just find it interesting and could benefit from the exercise in this episode. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And do come and say hi over on Threads and Instagram at the Sound Mind Talks. As I said, I would love to hear about your experience with this activity and just your thoughts in general. Are you an album person? Are you a playlist person? How do you feel like your music listening habits have changed over the years? There's infinite conversations to be had, so come over and say hi. But until next time, which is in 2 weeks, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on The Sound Mind.